Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. And at what point do ordinary people stand up? When do we acknowledge that we have a bunch of incompetent loons running the show? Not for nothing, but America is becoming the laughingstock of the world. And as this continues, that's going to be President Biden's ultimate legacy. It's like every institution has grown more incompetent by the day. And the serious people within the bureaucracy, the ones that you actually want making decisions and running the show, they've been all sidelined. They've been marginalized. They've been silenced. They need to stand up and speak out too. And I'm referring to the latest Navy recruitment effort. It's no secret that every branch of the military is missing their recruitment targets by wide margins. The military is in trouble. So what has the Navy decided to do to boost recruitment numbers? Well, they have now made an active duty naval officer who moonlights as a drag queen the face of recruitment efforts. The Navy says that they're trying to appeal to the broader population. It's amazing. You know, a few weeks ago, you had Budweiser insulting their target audience, and it's led to huge backlash. Rather than learn from the backlash, the Navy's like, hold my beer. I really don't get it. In marketing, you appeal to your target audience. You appeal to the widest base. Why does it seem like every company and every institution is targeting like 0.5% of our society rather than the 80%? And this stunt will not get us a single new recruit. In fact, I could guarantee you it's going to result in a net loss of recruits. It's going to make the situation worse. I could also guarantee that the probability has greatly increased that China and the CCP will attempt to recapture Taiwan. Imagine the conversations going on between Xi Jinping and his advisors. They're probably wondering, is this a joke? Are they trying to lull us into a sense of overconfidence? Or are they saying that the time is here? Now's the time to take over the world stage. Either way, it isn't good for the United States. It's mind-boggling. Now, getting to today's episode, well, make sure you follow the podcast so you never miss an episode and share this episode with family and friends and on social media. But getting to today's guest, I have former press secretary for President Trump, Kayleigh McEnany, is here. She's the co-host of Outnumbered, and she just wrote a brand new book, Serenity in the Storm, Living Through Chaos by Leaning on Christ. She explains that even though it feels like things may be hopeless, and many may be drawn to discouragement and despair, there is hope. Despite all the negativity, she highlights how parents are pushing back, you got the Supreme Court delivering conservative victories, and corrupt institutions are being exposed. So it's a message of hope and resilience. Kayleigh, welcome to the P.A.S. Report. Glad you could join me. How are you today?
It's so great to join you, Nick. I'm doing well.
I'm glad you could be here because there's a lot going on. When it comes to your book, you're in the news industry, so you're surrounded by like constant negativity day in, day out because the media has to report on all the negative stuff, and it's very difficult to see the positive. But what gave you the inspiration to actually write this book?
So, when I looked and surveyed really the news cycle, I'm in it every day as a co-host of Outnumbered on Fox that we air at noon. And, the subject matters we cover, are heavy and they're meaningful. Education, what is being pushed on our children, children whose parents aren't informed that they've decided to transition their gender and parents are left out because they have statewide parental secrecy policies, for example, things that are astonishing today to conceive and, matters you might not have even thought about, let's say 3 years ago. I realized that we're at a really interesting point in society when on the education front, religious liberty, it constantly seems like Christians' rights are being targeted. More recently, in the wake of the awful shooting in Nashville, we have a White House and administration that refused to say the word Christian in the wake of that shooting, which is really appalling when you consider it. When you look at all of these things, it's easy to just look at a news story as an isolated incident and move on with your life and say that's outrageous. But my theory with the book was something much bigger is happening in society. It's bigger than any one president. It's bigger than President Biden. It's really even bigger than one political party. And it's just a cultural shift. The tectonic plates underlying our culture have shifted, and we've foregone the values that have made us great. And that would be faith and tradition and patriotism.
And as you witnessed us moving away from those things that I believe are extraordinarily important in any society, do you think that that's what has driven the left? Is this movement away from that, and now government seeks to fill that void?
Without a doubt. I mean, look, I think that there are some on the left. There are some Democrats who, are faithful people themselves and may not see what's happening, but it is within their party on the far left flank of the party that you really see this insidious push away from God and toward government. It's undeniable. It happens, on virtually every place you look in corporate America, education system, government, but, they look at the big G as government, when unfortunately, they should be looking to the big G, that is God, who really undergirds the foundings of this great nation.
And it's interesting because I speak to Democrats a lot. I mean, I'm in academia, so I'm kind of surrounded by the left. When I speak to them, I mean, even they are stunned at how bizarre the debates have become, some of the issues that are being pushed out there. For normal, ordinary people, the normal people, doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, believe that you shouldn't give hormone treatments to kids that are 9, 10, 11 years old, and you shouldn't put them through these surgeries where they're going to get castrated. But why don't more people speak up? What do you think it is that's inhibiting them? And do you think it is that lack of faith that inhibits them from speaking up?
With that, for sure, it's a lack of faith that maybe some people don't fully understand it. I think there's another second component, which is cancel culture. People fear, if they're the ones to speak out against, let's say Budweiser and Dylan Mulvaney, and the way corporate America is going, that they'll be canceled from their job or they'll lose friends or maybe even family members. So I think that's part of it. It's such a strong movement. I agree with you that most, hardworking people just doing their day job don't look at these issues and think they make much sense. Like, I write about in the book, in my chapter on education, how, there's an example of a case out in California where, a young girl decided that she wanted to change her gender. She was going by a different name. And for just about a year, her mother had no idea and her mom had no idea until COVID and remote learning took over and she realized what was going on with her daughter. And you think, oh, well, that's in California, Kayleigh, like that's not happening in my state. Well, in my great home state of Florida, North Florida, even a conservative part of the state, you had a similar situation. There's a lawsuit there. A girl transitioned her gender. Parents had no idea, except in this case, they didn't find out until she made 2 suicide attempts in the school bathroom, too. It's just incredible that there's this movement to push parents out of the family, to destroy the family unit, and at the same time to push God out of the halls of our country. But at the same time, as dismal as all this sounds, another underlying theme throughout my book is that God is still at work, and we see that with the recent victories on the court for life, for religious liberty, even in the dark, dismal interior of Afghanistan where the Taliban rule, the underground church, while small, is very much on fire. And I got the opportunity to speak with a member of the underground church there in Afghanistan, and to see her joy amid such a sorrowful and horrific circumstance just goes to show God's at work, even if it does feel like we're at a very lost place in society.
You were part of the last administration. You were the spokesperson for President Trump. Are you surprised at how quickly all this has come about? Like, I can't imagine that when you were working for the Trump administration, that much of this was on the radar screen when it came to this whole idea of transitioning in children and hormone therapy and surgeries. It may have came up here and there, but I can't imagine like it was a main issue that you were talking about behind the scenes. Are you surprised at how fastly this movement has emerged?
It's shocking. It is shocking to me that every day when I look at what's going on in the news, it always seems to be something that bubbles to the top. When I was in the White House, we were talking about COVID and school lockdowns and how harmful that was to our children. And we were dealing with a global pandemic. And you think about any iteration of the news cycles before that, and there was a lot going on economically on the world stage. But there was nothing like this constant drumbeat of corporate America promoting this agenda, of the ferocious backlash you saw to Governor DeSantis's bill, which was very simple, that he signed into law that banned the teaching of sexuality in K-3 schools. Seems pretty basic. I have a 3-year-old. I can tell you that in 2 years, she is not equipped to go to kindergarten and start learning about sexuality and gender theory. And in the backlash he got, not from the public, to your point, when the public is polled on the bill he signed into law, they are widely in support of not talking about sexuality in K through 3 education. But the backlash,
and we're talking about straight
America,
sexuality as well. It's not like, it's any sexuality. So, I mean, it's pretty common sense.
Right. And the left, they call it the Don't Say Gay bill. But to your point, this is just sexuality in general. But the backlash he got from Disney, and then you see Bud Light, what they're doing more recently, and then you look at the policies across the country keeping parents out of education. And it is striking just how fast this agenda has come. And one other data point for the case I'm making, in the wake of the Nashville shooting, several times from the podium, although the word Christian was never used, Christians were the victim in that shooting. 6 Christians were killed, 3 of whom were 9 years old. They made it a point that week to continually bring up support for trans individuals. And the press secretary even used the word fight in the same sentence of her discussion about trans individuals on a week when a trans individual killed 6 Christians at that Nashville Christian school. So it's an agenda being pushed from the highest parts of the government, corporate America, but the rapidity with which it's been pushed, to your point, is really, really something.
And just to make a point, the manifesto still hasn't been released. It should be released. We have a right to see it, as do the victims of this horrific incident. Murder of these children. They have a right to see it, these families. The fact that it has been released is an insult, and it's shameful. I wish more in the press would actually speak out to try and get it released, put pressure on the local law enforcement there. In any event, we're going to take a quick break. When we get back, I want to talk about why they're pushing this from the top. Like, what benefit do we really get out of this as a society? And is it advancing us as a nation, or is it bringing us backwards? So we're going to take a quick break. Hang tight. We'll be right back. P.A.S. report listeners, hurricane season is almost here, and the time to prepare is right now, not when the hurricane hits. When Hurricane Ida hit the Gulf Coast, it destroyed countless homes and left many without access to food and clean water. Millions lost power, some for weeks. The floods that followed the hurricane washed out roads, made it impossible for grocery stores to restock their shelves. Families were desperate. They were waiting for help that was slow to arrive. But what if you didn't have to rely on FEMA to provide for your family during a crisis? The answer is simple. Be prepared with emergency food kits from 4 Patriots. Their long-lasting and delicious food options are specifically designed to provide you and your loved ones with the sustenance you need when you need it most. And these food kits are hand-packed in the USA, last up to 25 years, compact inside covert storage totes, include a wide variety of delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and they're backed by thousands of 5-star customer reviews. 4 Patriot survival food is not just for natural disasters. In today's world of uncertain supply chains and unpredictable emergencies, it's more important than ever to have a backup plan. Whether it's temporary power outage, a winter blizzard, rising food costs, you can rest easy knowing that you have a reliable source of food to see you through. And right now, you go to 4patriots.com, use code PAS to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store, including the emergency food supply kits that are designed to last up to 25 years. Just go to 4patriots.com, use code PAS to get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriot survival food. Welcome back, everyone. And we left off talking about the craziness that's going on, especially with this ideology that's being injected into all aspects of our society. But why do you think that they are pushing this at the top? Like, what's the point? And what's the result that they want to get from it? How does it make us stronger? I simply don't get the logic or the calculation that they're trying to make here.
It's a question I ask myself almost daily. I really, it befuddles me. It's not productive for our children. It's not embraced by a majority when they're polled on it. I don't know. I think, they believe that they can win on these so-called culture wars, that if they can get the right admired in these culture wars and paint the right as malicious and evil and unwelcoming, that it helps their case. So I think it's part of the broader effort to paint the so-called MAGA extremist as Biden did. You remember that blood red speech he gave in front of the red backdrop where he talked about MAGA Republicans being a threat to the country. I think it's all part of that agenda. It's one small piece of something broader, but it does befuddle me because I think if the Republicans and just common sense people, not just Republicans, can make the case of what's happening in this country, it is an issue that we have majority support on, which is parents' role in education. We can say we're empathetic towards trans individuals or people with gender identity issues, but empathy doesn't have to go hand in hand with, to your point, surgeries on children without parental consent, which you can do in a state like California or many other states across the nation.
As you delve into your book, Serenity in the Storm, You talk about domestic and international challenges, and you look at them through the prism of faith. When you look internationally and you see the BRICS movement rising up, 19 new countries are now wanting to join BRICS. BRICS is they're starting to purchase gold, which is unusual because gold is at all-time highs. Usually countries wait till the price is at a low. They're looking to replace the dollar as currency. When you see the challenges on the international world stage, what are your thoughts, particularly as it pertains to faith, because it appears that we're losing our power and influence?
Yeah, I think you're right. And there was a poll that came out in Pew that said in 25 years, a vast majority of Americans think that America will no longer be at the top of the world order, will no longer be a power broker on the world stage. And I fear we're going in that direction. And while I do believe, God is at work among believers, not only in Afghanistan, one of the countries where Christianity is quickly on the rise is China and Iran. They are two of the countries with the fastest growing Christian convert populations. And I think it's people who, they don't take democracy for granted because they don't have a democracy. They have an autocracy, and they realize the contrast between darkness and light, between authoritarianism and the freedom and love that comes with Christianity, which was the bedrock of our democracy. At least belief in God certainly was. But putting that aside, while there's encouraging notes there's a lot of discouraging notes that I don't think, God necessarily, works in the same way. We could certainly put our prayers forward for what happens on the world stage, but at a certain point, man has freedom of will. And what that means is when countries like China decide to broker deals between Saudi Arabia and Iran. We have a weak president here at home who, when I was in government, we had a president who was brokering Middle East peace deals like we've never seen before in decades and decades. He had 3 or 4 such peace deals. But now we have a president who's sitting back. We have free will, and he's choosing to use his free will to allow other countries to flex their muscles. China meeting many times with Russia, going about creating a new world order, flexing their muscles in Africa. I unfortunately think it feels like America's on decline, and unless we reverse course in a year and a half, I really worry for where we will be 5.5 years from now.
I agree. And it appears the entire Western world is destroying itself through self-inflicted wounds, unfortunately. It's not like it has to be this way. I mean, you just brought up the Abraham Accords under the Trump administration. Any other president, that would have got them a Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, that's how big of a deal it was. Yet you didn't hear anything about it in the media. Are you concerned that we're seeing such a blurring of the lines of the media industrial complex, academia, the Democrat Party, government institutions like the FBI? Are you concerned that the lines are blurring and it's just mostly a political agenda that's being pushed through all these different prisms?
For sure. I mean, if you go back and watch some of my press conferences and the ferocity with which the press ask questions.
But you actually answered questions. That's the main difference between the current administration and the previous administration. You were prepared and had the answers, where the new press secretary doesn't really answer any questions.
Yeah, I did. I worked and went to great pains to provide those answers. And, I took pride in it because we were in the middle of a global pandemic, and I would personally call up the CDC director, personally call up, any member of the task force, Dr. Robert Redfield, for example, among others, and, get information, Dr. Birx, and try to bring that to the podium and provide answers. But currently what we have is a press that is uninterested and asking questions that are unfriendly to the administration. Occasionally you'll get some, like today, or rather a few days ago, at the press conference that Biden gave with the South Korean president. You did have an ABC reporter ask about his age and how he views the unpopular polling that he has. But it's nothing like what President Trump, former President Trump, or I dealt with. All of the questions were negative, many of them imbued in total mistruth. And there was a get them sort of mentality that you don't see with the current administration. So, yeah, when you look at the blending of corporate America, of the federal government, to your point, the FBI, if you didn't believe there was a deep state, you really should believe it after we learned that it was Blinken who arranged a letter with 50 intel officers, 51, to say that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. On a campaign, you have surrogates. Typically, they're like media commentators, but it looks like the Biden campaign surrogates were former intel community guys, they could just call up and get to write a fake letter to dismiss what was a real laptop. So it's very concerning. I don't know that the press necessarily works in coordination with it all. I just think that they're uninterested in doing their job or holding a Democrat administration accountable.
I think that's for sure. But your book does provide hope, and that's what people need, especially during times like this. So how can an ordinary person that's looking at everything that's going on, how can they have hope? I know, again, media is doom and gloom, and it's the same thing holds true in the classroom. We talk about the issues, and most of the issues we talk about are going to be the negative ones. How does the ordinary person find hope?
Well, when you look, I think when Christians across the country pray, really extraordinary things can and do happen. And one of those extraordinary things has been the makeup of the Supreme Court. And, what we have seen has been a complete sea change in the direction of our country, thanks to 3 justices that were appointed by President Trump. And of course, I'm speaking of Barrett and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. And you look at the decision overturning Roe v. Wade, Dobbs, the fact that 63 million children were killed in this country after the passage of Roe to the scourge of abortion. And now you have life that is being cherished. You look on the religious liberty front, there is a coach, Coach Kennedy, who all he did was kneel at the 50-yard line in silent prayer after a football game for a few seconds. Then he was fired from his job. It took many, many years going through the court system and many losses before Amy Coney Barrett gets on the court, and now he has the right to pray in silent prayer at the 50-yard line. And even these COVID cases, churches, mosques, synagogues were all being targeted disproportionately. Open the casinos, open the Hollywood studios, but close the churches, the mosques, the synagogues. We were losing all of these cases in the court. And then Amy Coney Barrett gets put on the court, and what happens? All of a sudden, churches can now reopen. Guidelines all of a sudden struck down that disproportionately targeted communities of faith. So the court, I think, is a huge bright spot in our country, and that happened because of an unlikely election of President Trump that really no one saw coming, and it happened, and it changed the trajectory of our country in a very positive way. So good can happen. Good is happening. You just got to look for it a little more closely, but it certainly is there, and it can be there if the community of faith comes together in prayer.
And that's important to say, because one of my disappointments, I'm a Roman Catholic, and when the lockdowns occurred, I'm in New York State, so it was like the epicenter of tyranny and authoritarianism. Did you ever think that you'd see a time where government's going to dictate when, where, and how people practice their faith? And then the church actually didn't even really push back against it here in New York. In some places they did. Those are the cases you're talking about. But are you disappointed in not just the Catholic Church, but religious institutions that they didn't fight hard enough to keep their doors open, even as, liquor stores were remaining open, but AA meetings are non-essential because churches have to shut down. That's where most AA meetings take place. Were you disappointed that the leaders of faith didn't push back more and harder?
You know what? I saw many who did. And you are exactly right. There are some churches that did not. But just looking in New York, for example, one of the kind of watershed moments for the trajectory of religious liberty was when the Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn partnered with a Jewish synagogue, and together, Agudas Israel of America, the two entities, Jewish and Catholic, partnered and were able to strike down Andrew Cuomo's restrictions on houses of worship. That happened because you did have some bold members in the faith community. I've had the pleasure of speaking at several churches across the country. And one of the themes that I continually hear is, I sued the government and my church doors are now open. I've heard that at least 3 separate occasions. So while you're right, a lot of people stayed silent, there were a lot of people who tried to do drive-through worship services. And the police were sent after them, not because the police wanted to do that, but because, the mayor said, you got to shut that down. So there were a lot of people who tried to be bold, but I agree, it's far too few. And at a time like this, it's a time to speak up about our faith and about our rights. We have a First Amendment. And, while the left loves to scream separation of church and state, I would note that is nowhere in our founding documents. Yes, we can't have the establishment of a religion. That's in the First Amendment, but also what is in the First Amendment is freedom of worship. And the jurisprudence throughout history has shown justices saying we can't create a religion of secularism as we go about the contours of the First Amendment. So there's a lot of good happening on that front, and it's because there are Christians pushing back, but we need more to do so.
Certainly do. And everyone needs to check out Serenity in the Storm. Kayleigh, I really appreciate you coming on the program. We're going to have links up to the book on the website, PASreport.com. Thanks so much, Kayleigh.
Nick, thanks so much for having me, and good luck braving academia. I did for many years, and I know what you're up against.
It's always a fun battle, though. I love it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, keep being a warrior. Thanks so much for having me.
Great conversation. Great to talk to Kayleigh. Everyone should check out her new book, Serenity in the Storm. I have the links up at the PAS Report website, PASreport.com, so check it out. Make sure to tune in on Wednesday. I'm going to be talking about this coordinated effort that is designed to undermine America and the American identity. It's something that isn't getting enough attention, or the attention it nearly deserves, but I'm going to talk about it. As always, please share this episode with family and friends and on social media, and if you find the podcast informative, please take 30 seconds, write a good review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any other podcast platform that allows it, and leave the PAS Report a 5-star rating. I want to thank you for joining me, and I will be back on Wednesday with another great episode of the PAS Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.